There we go. Good morning. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It is Wednesday, March 19th, 2025. It is just after 9:30 a.m. And this morning, our task is to review a new Budget Adjustment Act. The governor vetoed the bill last week, and we worked on trying to negotiate things. And so what we have today is a bill that we are proposing to put through. We gave the governor back 99.9% of what he wanted. All the money is that we had put it in from the treasurer's office is not happening in this budget. The money's going back to the treasurer. We'll deal with it in the FY26 budget. And so there's essentially no new money except for what we were asked by the governor to put in there. And so the net of the matter is that we have, the only thing that we have kept in there is we've kept the dates to extend the hotel motel program to June 30th. And it's told that they should do that. So we didn't do it. So Emily's going to hand out a spreadsheet. Show us in living color what the changes are. Then we will listen to Grady with the bill itself and the web report we'll have, and then we'll go off live and have everybody take a few minutes to take a look at it, and then we'll come back and vote. We don't need a lot of time because it's all to be pretty familiar.
Font getting smaller and smaller. Was it just me?
Those glasses need to be fixed.
Oh, you want me to jump in?
Please.
All right, Emily Brown for the record, from the Joint Fiscal Office. Sorry for the delay in printing. As I mentioned, the spreadsheet got stuck in my outbox, and I will say the combination of working on two budgets simultaneously and trying to do my picks for March Madness.
Oh, yeah.
Picks are in. That's what matters, obviously. But anyway, okay. So I will share my screen as Chair Shai alluded to. The spreadsheet that you have in front of you should look very familiar. It is updated for the budget, what we're going to call the new budget adjustment. I turned it sideways compared to the previous one so that you make sure you get the landscape one as we talk about this one versus the one that was long. That was the first round of the budget adjustment. So to kind of walk through the structure of the sheet, it should be familiar. What we did is on the top part, this stuff doesn't change. This is the sort of starting place for FY25 and what you're sort of adjusting from. So you have the governor. The first column is the governor, what the governor originally recommended when he presented the budget adjustment to this committee in January. The next column is H141 as passed by House and Senate. And then we have the new budget adjustment column. So this is the new bill will reflect the changes in new BAA.
And do we have a number for the new bill?
No,
Not yet.
not until it leaves this committee.
Okay.
So and then the two differences columns is just to show, the first one is to show the difference from as passed by House and Senate, and then the difference from the governor's recommended budget adjustment. So if we go down to line 13, this is where we see the changes in the appropriations. I have collapsed all of the sections of the budget adjustment that aren't changing from sort of any iteration thus far. So from GovRec, House, Senate, or sort of the as passed version, or going from governor as passed and the new budget adjustment, everything that's not changing has been collapsed into line 18.
Okay.
You'll see on line 14, this is the Attorney General's office. H141 had added some funding for a position in the Solicitor General's office. That funding has been removed and the position is removed in the language in the new budget adjustment. The line that has not changed is in B502. This is the sort of a technical change for the Secretary, State's attorneys and sheriffs. You'll recall there was, they needed a little bit more money for mental health court order evaluations, but they also had savings in their SLA charges.
This is B205, right?
This is B205. And then in line 17 in the multiple is where we also see that negative 240,000 or 236,000 for the SLA change in the Secretary, State's attorneys and sheriff. Those are sort of technical changes and net each other out and actually result in a savings anyway. So that section remains from H141 to the new Budget Adjustment Act.
So just pause here for a second, Emily.
Yeah.
So that's the base adjustments. Does that all sound familiar? And everybody's good. I mean, everybody understands what we're doing there. Just want to be sure, Lynn?
Can you go and talk a little slower and go
Yes.
back over that?
Yeah.
I'm feeling bad because I was late.
No,
so
you
now-
are fine.
All right.
Take a deep breath.
Okay. So in B 205, in the state's attorneys and sheriffs, when they came to testify, they indicated, and this was adopted in H 141, they indicated that they needed a little bit more money in the line item for mental health evaluations, which was $45,000. They also indicated that the amount that was in the budget adjustment as submitted by the governor's office was overstated in their service level agreement charges. So they were able to reduce the state's attorney, and that's in line 17. So in line 17, you'll see a reduction of $236,500, which is what they did not need from their increase in their service level agreement. And then in line 15, you see an increase of $45,270. That's what they do need based on their sort of updated estimates and how much money they're going to need for mental health court-ordered evaluations.
Okay.
So those two technical changes remain from H
Right,
140.
and nobody had any problems with that, so that just stayed. Okay, so that is everything that's related to base, and Emily collapsed everything else in base into 18. There were no changes to
Yeah.
that, so there's no reason to clog up the spreadsheet with those things.
The only other one is on line 16. This is the same as the Attorney General position, but there was two additional positions created in the Human Rights Commission in line 16 for an additional $39,700 in H 141. Those two positions, along with the funding, have been removed from the new Budget Adjustment Act.
I'm sorry, where were
Line 16, the Human Rights Commission.
Oh, vacancy.
So there are three positions that were created in the
Oh, yeah.
Budget Adjustment Act, and they are no longer being created, and the money is also out of the new Budget Adjustment Act.
Okay,
Sorry, where were these three positions?
they were in B 236. on line
Two of those,
16.
two positions were
Two positions. We had put in for 2 months worth.
The Human Rights Commission in line 16, B 236, and one in the Attorney General's office, line 14, B 200.
All the positions, not the HRC one we've
No
done.
positions at all.
Okay,
All right. I will go down to the one-time adjustments from there. So the total adjustments, difference from the governor's recommend in the base is a negative 1.9, $0.19 million or $190,000.
90,000, right.
So the next line that we have a change in one-time adjustments is on line 23 and 24. These two lines go together. You'll recall in the governor's original budget recommendation, there was $4 million in the health department for provider stabilization grants. The governor requested that that line item be increased to $10 million and moved to the Department of Vermont Health Access. That's what you see is happening on line 24. That is still in the new budget adjustment.
Is that?
Line 25 is additional funding for the Brattleboro retreat due to the alternative model, their reconciliation payment. This was requested by the governor and taken from the C section of the governor's recommended FY 2026 budget.
So it just additionally gets to people faster.
Correct.
Because it's in here.
Correct. So that was $11 million. On line 26, a one-time appropriations to the Department for Children and Families. H 141 had $1,840,000 for additional costs associated with extending the cold weather policy through June 30th. It's our understanding that the Agency of Human Services has savings in that program and funding available to fund the program, even with the language change that extends the program through June 30. So the money is no longer included in the budget adjustment. The next line that you'll see changes on is in line 30 and 31, and these two are taken together. The Senate had added and the House concurred with in the conference report a appropriation to municipalities that were impacted by the floods last year. This included a sort of technical adjustment. There was $200,000 appropriated to make grants to Addison County related to floods that happened in summer of 2023. right?
That's right, 1.5.
2023, it was not enough money. So those Addison County grants, we pulled the money out and then wrapped all the grants for communities that were impacted by floods, both Addison County in August of 2023, and then last July 2024 flooding into the 1.8. So those two sort of net for an increase of 1.6 million for those municipal grants, but all the changes associated with those municipal grant programs come out. So the original 200 goes back to where it was, and then the 1.8 comes out.
So hang on a second, we have a question from Tom.
So this is stripping money away from Addison County communities, and this is the Addison County communities who suffered some damage, but they didn't achieve a high enough standard to make the FEMA, or is this a different way of need? Is this a different need that's being stripped away from them?
So the issue was in last year's budget, we allocated $200,000. So there, in last year's budget adjustment, there was a grant program for the municipalities that were impacted by the July 2023 flooding. But that left out the communities that were impacted by the August floods, primarily in Addison County. And we didn't have the data at the time to know exactly how much money to appropriate. So in the FY 2025 budget, we appropriated $200,000, which was the best estimate at the time, to help to basically have that same grant program extended to the Addison County communities that were impacted. Once the sort of final FEMA information came through, they needed more than $200,000 to help those communities. So those grants never went out because they didn't have sufficient spending authority to make the grants to those communities.
So they didn't do the 200,000, even though they needed more, but they decided to do all or nothing. So they got nothing.
They got nothing. So what this was working to fix was to sort of include those Addison County communities that didn't get the 200,000 that they were supposed to get last year, and then sort of wrap them into the expanded program that would include communities that were impacted by the flooding in July of 2024. And then there would be sufficient funding to get money to July 24 flood impacted communities, as well as the Addison County August 2023 impacted communities. Pulling this out means that won't happen at this point until there's a change.
Okay, so we're stripping the money away from those Addison County towns.
And not just Addison County, all the other communities too. Addison County was the 0.2, and then the 1.8 was everybody else.
All right, and these were funds that those communities had deemed necessary or to help with
Yes.
resiliency. All right, well, thank you. I'll be clear.
Oh, sorry, Lynn, go ahead.
So if that's the case, we have a positive 200,000, a negative 1.8 million. So take them, is the 200,000 that we're actually going to include, and we're taking up 1.8, or how does that?
So the net of those two transactions will be 1.6, right? So we're just going back to what the budget said, which has an appropriation of $200,000 for Addison County. And then we are striking the 1.8.
So there will
So Addison.
not be there will be 200,000 from 2025.
Yes, there'll be a $200,000 appropriation sort of sitting there.
Just sitting.
Yep.
Allocated to.
It's still technically allocated per the language that was in the original budget bill. The sort of ability for the administration to actually execute that will be, they still won't have sufficient money to meet the grant program requirements for those communities. So it will sort of wait in limbo until a decision is made to either change the amount that's available for those communities or to revert the money in the program. But at this point, it will just go back, it will revert back to what was in the governor's recommend, which was to just leave it at 200,000.
Is the administration going to testify to this proposal at all, or share their opinions on this publicly?
They are not at this point.
Okay. Thank you.
Want me to keep going?
Yes.
So the next line, line 32, it says new B1100 subpart W subpart 1 treasurer's bond redemption. So this is the $14 million that per the emergency board. So at the emergency board in July after the floods, the emergency board took $14 million from the appropriation to the treasurer's office to do early bond redemption and spent it on the BGAP program and one of the mobile home improvement programs. The emergency board motion required that the finance and management in the governor's recommended budget adjustment backfill that $14 million and to make that put that appropriation back to the total $20 million that it was prior to the emergency board action. So that was what was in governor's recommend. As you're aware, in H141, House and Senate decided to not backfill that appropriation and to utilize those dollars for other things in the budget adjustment. This new budget adjustment act goes back to the governor's recommendation, puts $14 million back into an appropriation to the treasurer's office for bond redemption.
And then reduce the 2.8 million for the Act 186 pilot.
That's next. I'll get to that.
Yes, yeah.
Yes. And so the next two line items, this is the Act 186 pilot project and the additional funding for VHCB. These two additional appropriations that were made in H141 by House and Senate have been removed in the new Budget Adjustment Act and are no longer occurring. Those are all of the changes to appropriations that have been made in the new Budget Adjustment Act. If we flip over to the next page, there are a few more very small changes. On line 42, this is the transfer in H141. Because there is money left on the bottom line in FY 2025, and the governor's recommend and sort of the plan is that those funds will be pulled forward into FY 26 and used in the FY 2026 budget construct. The governor's budget had those funds going, sort of put into a reserve and set aside. There was some negotiation back and forth between House and Senate in terms of how to appropriately designate those funds to ensure that they were made available in the next fiscal year. In a conference report, it was decided that those funds would be put into the other infrastructure and essential investments subaccount B. Part of the cash fund is sort of a holding place for those dollars until the FY 26 budget, and then they would be utilized either from that fund or transferred back out or sort of to be determined, but that was its holding place. The new budget adjustment does not put those funds into the other infrastructure and essentials investments subaccount B. In the language that we'll walk through, what is done is there's language to notwithstand the sort of year-end construct, and says that the first $133.5 million of unallocated and unreserved funds at the end of FY 25 shall be carried forward into FY 26 for appropriation or transfer. So that changes on line 42 is that it's not transferred to that other special fund in the new Budget Adjustment Act. In line 43, there is a small change from the governor's recommend, but these were requests that came to the General Assembly in H141. There are two changes in the other transfers. There is an additional $3 million going to the insurance reserve fund. You may recall that there was a need to make a payment, I believe related to the EB5 settlement, and it has to be general fund. So that transfer will still occur. That was a request of the administration. And then the other transfer is $220,000 was requested from the treasurer's office to go to the emergency personal survivor benefit fund so that they can make payments to families that are entitled to that. So those are still occurring in the new budget adjustment. Finally, the last line, there is a note on line 55. That's just the revenue upgrade that is sort of standard operating based on the fact that the governor's budget adjustment came in before the emergency board had adopted the new revenue forecast. So that just puts that into the math. And then on line 56, you'll note that there were in H141, you'll remember that there was $850,000 related to the judiciary to do network security and wiring, and $50,000 for a restroom. So in the way that it's not as clean in terms of an appropriation. It's a little funky because of its sort of old appropriations, but the governor had recommended that those funds get reverted as part of his proposed budget adjustment. And then what the legislature decided to do was not take those reversions and then to adjust the prior year appropriations to make those additional expenses an allowable use of those appropriations. The new budget adjustment goes back to the governor's original construct, which reverts those funds. So reverts the additional 800,000, the additional $50,000 and strikes the language. It doesn't include the language that allows the additional uses of those funds for the network security and the bathroom in the judiciary. And so those are all of the changes, which leaves 133.5 approximately $1 million on the bottom line in FY25 to be carried forward into FY26 for appropriation or transfer or.
And we have language, that's in the language in the
Correct.
new budget.
Where in here, sorry if I can't read the spreadsheets correctly, where in here is the funding for nursing homes or funding for veterans home or other important elements of the bill that was vetoed?
Yeah, so that is in line 18, the all other changes. That is reflective of about $39.2 million worth of changes. So all those other changes that sort of nothing has changed since the governor recommended are captured in that number.
But these were all emergency funds. These were described as emergency needs in order to make budgets work or to save institutions that were struggling financially. Veterans home was a common, an unfortunately common BAA adjustment that hopefully will be maintained, or I'm sorry, will be changed this year. But those were all vetoed along with the idea of not providing shelter. Is that right?
Correct.
Any other questions, Lynn?
I want to clarify that to what Representative Stevens said. So 19, 18. You've got the changes above that, all those other lines above that, and that includes essentially no changes to all the other stuff that would be in here that was not touched in this negotiation.
Correct.
So those things are there.
They're there. Yes.
Okay, so the only thing that really changes are these smaller lines here on this sheet.
And I can print the big sheet that shows all of the changes if that would be helpful.
Right there.
That's got everything on it. I figured for the purposes of walking through what actually changed rather than rehashing and revisiting sort of every line item.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so that emergency stuff that we talked about is in there, still in there. Okay. So the second thing I want to say is I am going to be an advocate for line 33 for Act 186 pilot.
Yes.
The 2.8, that is only part of the money that they need to finish this. This is just from the state. And we've got-
That's right. That's the state money.
And will that be, or what's the chances of that being in the big budget?
So we were just asked to move all of these transactions to the big budget. The 14 million is being sent to the treasurer, which is what the governor's asked to do. Once it's in the treasurer's, we can access those funds. And I've already talked to the treasurer, so we can still access that money, the
Okay.
$19 million.
He's in there as well.
All of the things that were related to the money that was going to go to the treasurer, we will be able to do in the section C of the big bill of the budget.
Right.
And use the same money. It's just going to be in a different bill.
Because that's a VHCB.
VHCB, yes, and we have to go through VHCB for that pilot, because we can't give it directly to, whatever, we're not allowed to, so this is how we.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so that'll be in the big bill. And section C, for those of you that are less familiar with it, is the section that becomes effective on passage, as opposed to waiting till the next fiscal year, so it's immediate, and so the money is delayed because it isn't in this budget, but it would be accessed more quickly because it would be in section C of the big. So there's a bunch of stuff that's in there. That's some of the stuff that we took out. The governor said, well, we have some things in section C, can we pull them into here? Like the 3 million for the insurance payment and the 11 million for the Brattleboro retreat. If we hadn't put it in here, that would have been in section C of the big bill, but it made sense to try to pay those and get those things faster. And that was our thinking also on things like the housing projects. Because getting the money out faster means that we have more housing for people to go into. But that's what we got. Any other questions on the numbers at this point? Thank you, Emily. And you want to hang out there or something? And Grady, are you up
Yeah.
next?
And we will hand out the web report, which will show, the FY 25 as passed, and then the FY 25 gov rec and the House version, which shows the changes in those individual appropriations, sort of ones that you both were alluding to, the sort of all other changes. It will show those differences in places like DIVA and the Veterans Home and other places throughout the budget where those changes are happening. And you'll see them in the numbers section.
So Grady Nixon, joint fiscal. In front of you, you have the current draft of the reborn BAA. So I'll just walk the committee through where those changes Emily mentioned are in the language. If you turn to page 5, you'll see the numbers section changes. So the change to the Attorney General's office, the money for those positions, because that's not being added, that section was removed entirely. You won't see it in this bill. You will see section 8 has a change to the numbers for the Human Rights Commission related to the reduction of funds for those positions that aren't being added. And in section 9, those are the total changes. So those represent the protection of persons and property number changes.
So, Ray, I just wanted to let people know, because we talked about this last night, the things that were removed, if we had to remove a whole section, you're just not going to see it in here, right? So we actually checked, and the number of pages of the bill that was approved by the conference committee report was 78 pages, and this is 74 pages because some things were removed. So you just aren't going to see them, but you'll let us know where we're not seeing things.
Right.
Thank you.
On page 29, you'll see that in section 50, the treasurer one-time appropriation. So this is that $14 million. On page 29,
Yeah, so this is a place where you will not see the appropriations to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board or the municipal grant programs at the Agency of Administration. Yeah, they were in.
That's out.
Those are gone. They were in former section W, B and W, I believe.
yes. So on page 29, what you will not see is AOA appropriation to municipalities and the VHCD appropriations for the pilot funding and the 8.6 million for other investments. On page 36, section 53, judiciary reversions. So this is reverting the 800,000 and the 50,000. What you will no longer see are the appropriation amendments that were happening in the BAA, which was the 50,000 for the Essex Meeting House for the ADA accessible bathroom and the 800,000 for technology.
I was confused on the spreadsheet. So the reversions are happening as originally proposed.
Yes.
So that improvement to the courthouse, for example, it's not happening. Is that
Correct. So the Gov Rec had these reversions happening, and then the BAA, as it was sent to the governor, had said, don't revert the money, use it for other means. This just reverts the money.
So we actually used some of the 14 million for this. For that 850,000 was part of the money, the 14 million that is now going back to the treasury.
see it again? We'll see it again.
Yeah, we'll see.
Okay. Thanks.
On page 39, section 54. So this is the year-end closeout language. And you will no longer see the cash fund transfer. So in the BAA as passed by the Senate and the House, there was a large transfer to the cash fund to sort of park that money for FY26. This is a different construct meant to also do a similar thing.
So the governor had almost this language, but I don't think we had an exact amount. I'm trying to remember. But and then the House actually proposed this to the Senate in negotiations with the Committee of Conference. And we ended up agreeing with them to put it in the cash fund. And this was another request of the administration to do it sort of more back what the House had proposed originally. So the number's been updated to what we've got. The language is the same, that it says reserve for permanent housing, property tax relief, and any other uses determined to be in the best interest of the public in the subsequent. So I'm okay with this language because we have any other uses. We don't know what we're going to need for other things. And being too prescriptive has its problems. So I can appreciate that that's in there.
Actually, so following up on the re-clarification, we had this originally, what we passed in the House. The Senate proposed something different. Can I get an explanation of, we were reverting back to statute, correct? By removing this language in the what passed?
So the House had similar language to this. The Gov Rec had language like this without a dollar amount fixed to it. So it was any funds left over, notwithstanding the statutory automatic closeout language. The Senate took that language out. In conference, as Rep. Shai mentioned, language similar to this with a different dollar figure was proposed by the House. It was rejected by the Senate. The Senate had a proposal to instead put that money in as a transfer to the other infrastructure account of the cash fund. That was in the BAA as passed by both houses, the Committee of Conference report. This goes back to language that is substantively similar to what the House had in its as passed bill.
It's a specific dollar amount. So if it ends up being more than that, then there's other statute that comes into play.
So
And
the first $133 million
basically goes to
goes
this.
to this
Right.
decision-making process.
Yes.
And then anything over this would be, okay.
That's really it.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
But the reality is, we're probably gonna change the language
In the budget,
in the big bill.
could be changed in the big bill.
You know,
Yes,
whether
exactly.
Contingencies or.
Right. And remember that we don't know what's going to happen coming out of Washington. We heard yesterday that CVOEO lost 80% of its fair housing money, and then the Department of Libraries is losing their biggest grant from the federal government. These are still the small things. We don't know what else is going to happen. So we're going along. I think we have to continue to do the best we can to serve Vermonters and leave as much flexibility as we can, because we don't know what's going to hit us next. So that's part of why I'm glad it has other uses. Okay, I'm off my soapbox.
Also on page 39, I would just flag for the committee in section 55, this is where you won't see the positions.
Yes.
On page 74, that's just the update to the effective dates per renumbering.
Oh, question.
Regarding positions, I believe that we added 2 positions to the Attorney General's office. One was the pre-charge position, which came out of the House. The Senate added another AG position. And when you reference D200 here, you reference do not create new position.
Oh, it's 2. And so you're saying it's really 2 positions.
So I'm not seeing either position here, so it must be 2 you're taking out.
They are. Let's check out 2.
I believe, and we need to go back and check, but I believe the pre-charge one was in the governor's recommend, which is why it was created in the House version.
It wasn't.
It's not in the House. Oh, no, the position wasn't. The funding is in the AG's budget, right? But not the position. I think that's what it is. We'll go back.
The pre-charge, we were just creating a
You're
position.
creating a position, but there was no new money, right? Then-
We added a position, the Senate added a little money for.
For the solicitor.
For a different
And
position.
they added another position.
Yeah.
With a little bit of money for the 2 months that were left.
But I think
This
it's
takes them both.
both out. They're both
Yeah,
out.
exactly. I just want to clarify.
And so that's what we'll deal with in a bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so where are we? Grady, are we at the last page?
Yes, I believe so. So, nothing actually changed here. It's just the bill, needs to get renumbered because the Attorney General's section was removed. So, now section 66 is effective retroactively. That's the, payment to, districts in the kingdom, for overpayment. And, section 89, which is the hold harmless, muni property tax abatement section. That's now effective retroactively on November 15th.
Thank you, Grady. Does anybody have any more questions for Grady on the language? Mike, you good? You're in? Okay. We also have the web report. Did we get the web report passed out? Pardon? Yeah. You'll take care of it. Oh, you're correct, go ahead.
So where is the general assistance housing?
So the general assistance housing language still lives in the same section. It's renumbered though, just one moment. So now it is section 88. So nothing in that language section changed, just the additional appropriation of funds that was in section 50, the B1100 amendments. No longer appears.
69 and 70 is where that is located.
Thank you.
Okay. Web report. Who wants to talk to us about the web report? Is this?
I can.
Give Maria a break from.
Or yeah, unless Maria really wants.
Maria, do you want to do this? Okay, we'll let her. I got that. I just, we don't want to have you feel like you're.
No, I feel good.
Okay, great. That's what we want. Okay, Emily.
You know what? This is not. This one just says GovRec. It does not have the house changes in it. We will get you a new one that has the house changes in it, but this is, so. Yeah, we need to get you a new one, but this is where you'll see sort of what Representative Stevens and Representative Dickinson were talking about in terms of the, like, this is the as passed and here are the changes that the governor has recommended that includes. When you go to page, where's a good one? Page 4 has the global commitment changes where you see there's $125 million worth of additional funding in the global commitment appropriation that was in the governor's recommend. That will be in the House version of the budget adjustment 2.0.
So it looks like we need another one.
We'll get you another one with the House changes. And the House changes are going to be minimal, right? Like, so all it will show, there will be the note in the state's attorneys for that little technical change. There'll be a note in the places where you add things that the governor requested, like the $11 million for the Brattleboro retreat. But those will be all in the one-time section at the back.
So how long would it take to get, is this just a printing?
It's a printing thing.
Okay. So what I'd like to do then is just, well, maybe we go off live for another 15 minutes. You all can look at stuff, we can chat, we'll come back and look at the web report, and then we'll see where we are. I will just check on I think we have to vote this morning, but.
I have a quick question, Grady.
Okay.
On the GA housing, language. It talks about June 30th, 2025, which is the winter rules that there's been originally in the House version of the bill. What happens if we don't duplicate the language in the fiscal year 26 budget and we don't pass H91? What happens on July 1? Do you know? Does it revert back?
This language only applies to the current fiscal year. So
That's a ledge council
I
question.
would think that I would defer to the council on that.
Tom.
And just on the GA thing, I just want to point out that, this language is specifically the motel program. I do want to point out that the, housing program that the governor instituted, and that's in Waterbury, and I can't speak for Williston, those programs, the funding is to go through June 30th as well.
Yes. I think there's like 17 families.
It's a total of 17 families. It's rarely used.
Right,
But the fact is that whatever funding is available through the
that as
end of the
well.
budget year, just like this isn't.
right,
Unless this language passes.
right. The money is there. Okay.
So what kind of, during discussions were there, what kind of discussions surrounded this GA program?
There were discussions, they came back with a similar offer of putting this on the towns. And, starting April 1st.
How did they propose it or what, I mean, did they have any specifics about that?
It was not completely formed.
There was some kind of,
There was, we did not see a whole proposal that explained the whole thing. We had a conversation about it. The concept was that money would go to the towns along the same lines as what was in the district offices for DCF. There's 12 of them, so they were looking at doing that. There was going to be a small town minimum, was their thinking, but they were going to have to do contracts with the towns. They were going to give extra money to the towns to help out if they needed administrative costs and any setup costs. Trying to do that in 10 days is pretty difficult, hiring people and setting up a whole new program that would only last to June 30th, and then they'd revert back to the state. The towns had not been asked about it, whether they wanted to do it. There was some thinking on the administration's part that a town, say like Barry or Rutland, could work with the other municipalities, but municipalities can't give money to other municipalities. So, one place has to actually run the whole show. There were phone calls to some of those places, and the people were, the county had the LCT come in and they were very strongly opposed to it. There was some conversation of whether the CAP agencies could do it. We still have a time problem. April 1st is in 10 days, 11 days, whatever. And so making that happen, if we had been discussing this back in January, it might have been a different conversation, but 11 days isn't enough time to do that. Then there was also conversation of possibly keeping just the children and their families in to June 30th, and also people who have who need a device or like a wheelchair or crutches, or people who had a medical need a medical device that was life-saving that needed to be plugged in. But there wasn't anything about anybody who had medication that needed to be refrigerated. There was also not included pregnant women and women who were fleeing domestic violence or veterans. So it was a very limited.
but still there was some, as you know very well, I have severe concern.
I know this is not your favorite program.
And
Right.
my thing is, I'd like to have the sheep sorted from goats, so to speak. And if there was those pregnant women and women with children,
Yeah,
I'd like to have them in a safe environment.
right.
And if the others were out, then the environment would be a lot safer. And so,
Well, I mean, if we're talking about people with disabilities who are on oxygen machines
well,
that need to be
I'd like
plugged
to take
in.
care of the people that are like that, then we've got, there has to be a, you know, the numbers.
I actually have the numbers that they had from, not of, I have some numbers. I don't have all the numbers. The eligibility is very much narrowed and strictly defined. There are not able-bodied people hanging around in hotel rooms watching the Hunger Games. That is not who is in the hotel rooms. These are people with disabilities. They're people who are pregnant. They're fleeing domestic violence. They're over 65. They're children and families. Dave, I may be missing some or tips, but that's.
You got 'em.
People have been,
Sorry? Is that kind of it?
people have been evicted because the landlord wants to renovate the property and there's nothing that they can then afford.
But they have to be in these
Because
categories.
We've heard that 140 people have died in there since that program started.
130 people have died
30?
in the hotel motel program in the last like 5 years. What we don't know is how many of them would have died anyhow, or been out, if they were outside and had no place to live. So they have a roof over their heads.
But we
We
don't,
don't have a control group for
but we
that.
don't know how many died of frostbite. Probably none of them froze to death.
We did have some this year. Yes, we did.
Yeah.
Yes, we did, at least
In the
7
program.
who didn't have the program.
So the thing is, but for how many years has the program ended at the end of March?
I don't, I'm not the expert on all of the back details of the Human Services Committee, what they've done. I can't tell you.
We can debate this to the
Right,
come home, but we're
Right.
not going to solve it. My understanding is there's not an agreement between the administration and the conferees. So it's problematic at this point because the governor is not on board with signing this proposal, as I understand. So,
And I would just like to say, I'm compassionate about people. I want to see the right thing done.
Yeah.
And I want to see the right thing done for
the people who need the right thing done.
exactly.
I understand what you're saying. This is one of those things where we're gonna have a lot of different opinions. I think, yeah, I guess that's all I'm gonna say for right now. Mike had a comment or question.
Yeah, thank you. Tom had raised the question before, whether the administration is going to testify and comment on this. And one of the things I would like to hear about is, we have been waiting 4 years for a plan in the administration. We've been waiting 4 years for leadership. And what I keep hearing is that the governor doesn't like this plan. So where is the alternative plan? And I would still pose that question to the administration. I mean, we
Well,
look
we've
to
had
them
those
for
discussions.
leadership,
Yeah, we've had those discussions.
and I don't know where the leadership is.
Yeah.
So it feels somewhat contradictory to propose that you don't like something without proposing something else.
Well, I think we all agree that we don't like this program. This is not the solution. It's not a long-term solution. I think we all agree with that. So that's why the Human Services Committee, we put in legislation 4 years ago to have the administration come up with a plan. Human Services Committee is now doing something and working on something now because there hasn't been a plan. That's what we are. John.
And I wonder, is the administration part of that though?
She has been that committee is including folks from DCF and whoever.
We're here for 18 weeks. The administration is here year round. That's why we look to them for leadership.
So we will hear more. John.
So that's what I heard from Representative Wood as well, that they're working on a plan. I think that's got to start in May here for things. Both have to work together. So I'm disagree with anything said here. I don't have a question about this issue.
Yeah, okay.
I have a question for Grady here. So section 66, that was the NEK. I mean, kind of truing up, like they overpaid. That's going right back to the districts, correct?
Yes, so
Not the individual taxpayers.
correct. And the original language to issue was just they can distribute it to towns directly the way that they had originally had it. So this just sends it all to those.
So that'll be an ad for them budgetarily here for their district.
I'm not sure how they factor this in, but it's just a compensation for the public point.
Right, I understood that part. Great, I just want to be clear about that. Thanks, because they'll call me.
Any other questions? All right, why don't we will go up live in a sec. We'll get the other web report. We'll come back. We're moving the 11 o'clock conversation about a bill to 1 o'clock. So I think we need to get this out before the floor. I'm just checking on that now. I think that's what we need to do. So I want to be sure we have the time to do that. So let's go off live and think about